Hello, my name is Bird Running Water, and I belong to the Cheyenne and Mescalero Apache nations. I'm honored to be welcoming you to our reimagined Sundance Film Festival, coming from the indigenous lands of North America. I'd like to pay a special tribute to the Ute Tribal Nation, the Lenni Lenape Nation, and the Tongva people. We thank them all for giving Sundance Institute our homes. I would also like to honor the indigenous lands and people from where you are joining us. Please enjoy the show. Ikahet Ahanaka.
Hello, I'm Kim Yutani, Director of Programming of the Sundance Film Festival. Thank you for tuning in to our series, The Big Conversation. This talk is called Barbed Wire Kisses Redux, and we are so happy to have it as part of our 2021 festival. I want to thank all the truly great artists who are participating in this panel. And of course, I want to thank the always marvelous moderator, B. Ruby Rich. And to give a little context to this panel before we jump into things, I'd like to introduce the person who really gave us the idea to put this talk together. He is the co-president of the Venerable Strand Releasing and a truly important figure in independent cinema and specifically queer cinema, and has had a huge influence on me personally. So I'm very grateful for that. Please welcome Marcus Hu.
Thank you, Kim. I can't believe it's been 29 years since Marlon Riggs sat in my lap in a crammed car with Gregg Araki to attend that Barbed Wire Kisses panel that Alberto Garcia and Robert Redford organized. The panel was named after a Jesus and Mary Chain song, but you probably knew that already. It was also a landmark moment for cinema. Today, we're thrilled to have Isaac Julien, Tom Kalin, and Rose Troche here with Gregg for the first part of our panel. It was at that panel Ruby Rich coined the term the new queer cinema, and it's been her persistent vision to write and talk about these historical moments and how it's evolved over the past 3 decades. She's chronicled this moment and new filmmakers and storytellers that include Lisa Cholodenko, Andrew Ahn, Silas Howard, and Cheryl Dunye, who will be on hand for the second part of the panel. I'm so honored to have assembled this panel with you in Sundance, and hope it inspires a new generation of filmmakers and audiences like it did for me 30 years ago. And now, here's Ruby Rich.
Welcome, everyone, to the new queer cinema Redux, otherwise known as the Barbed Wire Kisses Redux, which we'll hear about later, commemorating the year 1992, when this all kicked off at Sundance, to a huge crowded room filled with people who were going to come out for the first time ever at a mainstream film festival, hard as that may be to believe. We have some of the original panelists with us today, as well as several people that, well, one that should have been on it and wasn't, and one that was inspired by it and has every right to be here now. So I want to start off by thanking Marcus Hu and John Nine, who pulled this together. Thanks to Kim Yutani, and thanks to Glenn and John and everyone else on the team bringing us to you. I want to kind of revisit 1992 for just a second, because at that time, January 92, we were in the 12th year of the Reagan-Bush regime. We're 12 years of Republican rule, and we were still in the white-hot heat of the AIDS epidemic. There was not yet a cure. The cocktail would not be invented for about another 5 years. And it was a time of immense despair and immense energy. And I think that this panel really marked a moment when people began to take stock of what was going on, what was happening to the queer community. People were kind of bloodied from these years of attack coming out of Washington under 2 different presidents, and no idea that there was about to be a change at any time soon. And so I think it's a fitting moment to be bringing you now in 2021, when we are just hopefully leaving another horrific regime and beginning to figure out, in the midst of a very different pandemic, the COVID pandemic, what on earth is going on, and how can film inspire us, and what is there within the queer community and coming out of the queer community to lead us forward through intersections with other groups and other struggles, and through the aesthetic invention of wonderful filmmakers like those we have on here today. So I've asked everyone to kind of reflect back on that 1992 moment. I'm going to start off with Tom and Isaac, who were on that original panel. And I think I'll start with you, Tom Kalin, filmmaker extraordinaire, now teaching a whole new generation at Columbia. But in 1992, you were on the panel because you had just made Swoon, and we were really excited about it. So for a few minutes, can you talk about that moment, that time, and that movement?
Absolutely. Hi, Ruby, by the way, and Isaac and Rose and Greg. It's a total treat to be here with you. We've had many adventures over the years, and it's fun to have this one with you now. I was just thinking about COVID and AIDS. You know, at the height of the AIDS crisis, we could only talk about how many people died per hour. So we were shocked that, you know, 1 AIDS death every hour or 2 AIDS death every hour. And now we're living in a situation where people are dying by the minute. Thousands and thousands of people are dying on a daily basis. So that feels familiar. Obviously, COVID and AIDS are not the same moment at all. But yeah, it's striking to think that George Bush was our major antagonist in '92, and we couldn't imagine a president as terrible as the one that's leaving office now. It was a really energizing time. You know, I got to meet one of my idols, Derek Jarman, who, you know, Swoon is so indebted to in the ways I was using period anachronism and thinking back on queer history. And I had known Isaac a bit from sort of the video art world, which we both came out of. And Ruby, I knew you, and, you know, other people I didn't know, like Greg, I had known his amazing Three Bewildered People in the Night, and met him then. And also, you know, New Queer Cinema is how I linked to Rose. So on a personal level, it's been, you know, hugely impactful. But that moment was urgent and angry, and we felt like we could make a difference. And I feel like films still have that capacity. And I still feel like we have the energy, and we are really in need of that kind of optimism and clarifying anger directed towards a solution.
And speaking of anger, you were coming out of Act Up and Grand Fury, and this very kind of direct action using art. So it must have been interesting to then move the frame up the mountains into Park City to this moment there.
Totally was. I think there was a real fluid relationship between what was happening in Act Up. I mean, it's notable, for instance, that Rose Troche or Todd Haynes or Christine Vachon were all members of Act Up, and I'm involved in the activist movement. And also it resonates with now. I think of the Black Lives Movement, Black Lives Matter movement, and how impactful it's been, and graphically and nationally, how it's had a kind of groundswell over the last 9 months that really resonates again with this kind of tipping point where people are fed up and taking to the streets.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Tom. That's great. Isaac, I want to go to you because you came to Sundance with your film, your feature film, Young Soul Rebels, which you had premiered at Cannes. It won the Prix de la Semaine de la Critique at Cannes. You'd already made a name for yourself in New York with Looking for Langston, which showed at New York Film Festival and, you know, incurred the wrath of the Langston Hughes estate. What was it like for you coming to Sundance for the first time with Young Soul Rebels in '92?
I mean, I think, you know, as Tom says, it was incredibly exciting, and I think it was a groundswell tipping point moment. It was a moment where basically, along with, I think, our sort of American comrades, we were sort of, as it were, sort of at the forefront, I think, with, in a way, Derek Jarman as our sort of godfather, so to speak, of queer cinema. And in a way, it was incredibly exciting to have everybody assembled at that particular moment, because it's a time, I would say, in both sort of independent film culture, but generally in the culture, a kind of groundswell where we were really thinking about film as a kind of tool that was going to, which we were able to arm ourselves with, and to challenge all the kind of normative stereotypical and kind of, if you like, boring aspects that we thought about in relationship to gay cinema, so to speak. The new queer cinema was, in a way, a kind of sort of aesthetic strategy of trying to both contest and undo all of those sort of aspects in film that we felt were missing, and to infuse that with the kind of politics of, to a certain extent, of activism. But at the same time, I think it was a moment where we were also trying to attune the audiences that we were making works in a way towards, with this kind of language that would somehow really challenge and make a kind of break, with the ways in which sort of films were being made by people who were sort of queer before, So I think it was a kind of revolutionary moment in terms of both the aesthetics, but also in terms of the way the films were made and the ambition that we had, for our audiences. And so it was a zeitgeist moment, and I think that the Barbed Wire panels captured that moment, So I'm thinking about, everybody here on our panel today. I'm thinking about artists like Sadie Benin as well. Two, of course, artists like Derek Jarman, who, was really, at the forefront, I would say, of really trying to make these interventions. We had Thatcherism, which was very much still in its stride at that particular moment. So it's a real critical moment, really, of trying to contest all of these oppressive scenarios. And I think, as Tom said, it's interesting in terms of the parallels, in terms of the current health crisis we're in today, and the ways in which I would say the movement both to that crisis, but also to the sort of ongoing violence of police brutality, that we can see that there's a kind of a moment here which has a similar kind of aspect to it in a much more extreme form, perhaps.
Well, thank you, Isaac. That's great. And Derek Jarman, who died just a few years after the panel, had come to the panel saying that he wanted to escape his 50th birthday in London. And he came to duck away as if he could run away from his age by crossing the Atlantic. And so I still remember that really, really clearly. But, one of the mysteries, even for me back then, was how this panel got its name. And it was named by Alberto Garcia, who was then working at Sundance and programming the festival. And Gregg Araki, I understand that you have an explanation for the name. Can I toss this over to you and hear that explanation before getting you to talk about The Living End, your wonderful film that you brought to the festival?
Yeah, the name Barbed Wire Kisses is actually from a Jesus and Mary Chain album that was popular. That I remember Alberto and our whole gang of people were listening to a lot at that time, and that's kind of it's. So I was wondering like how many people actually knew that, and apparently I'm the only person on the panel right now today that knows that background. But, yeah, it's in 92. It was an incredible time in the sense that it was such a, it's so great that these films are around. That's my dog, by the way. That it captures that moment. That it was such a kind of spontaneous. The thing I always used to say about the queer new wave was that there was no like orchestrated new wave in terms of the way the French new wave was sort of planned, and there was a manifesto, and there was it was like a group of filmmakers getting together. This was more just like everybody sort of working in London or San Francisco or New York or LA, and all energized by the same things.
Or Chicago.
Yeah, Chicago. Well, Chicago a little bit. I guess a little bit later, right?
You're right.
and the idea energized by the same thing that was energizing Coronation and ACT UP, just the outrage and the anger and the frustration and the despair, and turning that via art into these kind of really potent documents that I think it's so amazing. I think that they're still around today as artifacts of that time and the parallels and analogies to what we're going through now and in future generations. I mean, when I saw the Living End again in 2008 when we remastered it, it was so strange to watch it from that perspective, because it was I'd forgotten so many parts of it, and just how pure it was in terms of my own processing of my feelings and all the kind of emotions and all the turmoil of that period, or so much captured in those movies, and it really, particularly for younger generations, I think it's great that they can see that as a document, because it's so foreign even to me, who had lived through it, to believe that that was the world that we were in.
That's great. That's great. I want to go to you, Rose, because you weren't on this panel. You had not made Go Fish yet. It would be another 2 years before you came back to Sundance in 1994 with Go Fish. And at the same time, I just want to acknowledge that there were very few women filmmakers working in queer cinema at that time outside of short video pieces, which was why Sadie Benning was on the panel, because she was doing those tiny little Fisher-Price video pieces then. And Lisa Kennedy, who was my editor at the Village Voice, was also on that panel. And so I wonder, Rose, what was your sense of what was happening? And how did this energy translate into something for you?
I was in Chicago, and I remember going to the Music Box and seeing Poison. And Todd was there. I think Christine was there. I didn't know either of them at the time, obviously. But I was so just influenced, and like I was doing Go Fish in 3 parts, and I was doing photography at the same time, and I was like, there is no original. Let me just like pull from here, here, and here. And as Tom said, I was in ACT UP and Queer Nation, and the whole, Go Fish would not have happened outside of the anger we were all feeling, and outside of the activism, outside of feeling invisible. And there was a sense of this lesbian invisibility at that time. And Go Fish was definitely a film that was responding to that moment. It's interesting, because I was just kind of listening, to everybody else speak, and I just feel like what we had done with the anger of that time, the political sort of it was fuel, and it's interesting. I know that we'll get to this, but it's interesting now to look at this moment right now and to figure out what the fuel is. It's we all do have these very strong voices, and it becomes more and more, I find with my own self, it becomes more and more complex to know how to respond to something seemingly this convoluted. Back then, I mean, what I love about, and Craig, I know what Greg, I know what you mean about looking at your work again and just seeing this energy in it and this hopefulness in it. I mean, I hadn't seen Go Fish for 11 years, and when I saw it again, I'm like, oh my God, how sweetly naive and lovable it is, and clunky, but the heart in it is like something that I will never have. These are testaments to a moment in time. We will never have these moments of innocence in a way back again. And something tells me like there, and that straight line to our own anger and outrage, that really kind of fueled a lot of these works, even if they came out, with The Girl Is Out There, like Go Fish, it still had this heart in it that was about a movement and about something that really needed to happen in our society. And
Great.
Ruby, it was all because of reading the New Queer Cinema article, which
Really?
included a gorgeous picture of Tom I still remember that gorgeous picture of Tom Kalin. I'm like, oh, like, you know, it's like a black and white like photo. I think it had a photo from The Living End. I literally scoured that article and called everybody in it. And that's how I got hooked up with Christine and Tom. Yeah. So you made that happen. I have to always tip my hat to you.
Well, I think for me as a critic, it was a dream moment because you want to be part of a historic moment. You dream of finding the films that are going to kind of change the culture. And thanks to all of you, I had that position. And then I got to write about Go Fish when you made it. So it's been a terrific ride. We have a few minutes left, and I just want to bring us up to the present. I mean, we've kind of crept along there with references to the pandemic, but I want to just get a sense from some of you about this moment now, and where does one find the energy today? Where does being queer fit into this moment of insurgent fascism that we have going on in the United States? And what do you imagine could be a filmic practice or a video practice or a YouTube practice that would engage people and move them the way that your work has, starting back then and over the years? Any thoughts about that, about this moment now? What stays in your head from that time? Yeah, what works now? Tom?
I mean, it's not queer representation, but when I think of a movie like Sorry to Bother You by Boots Riley, and it's so completely in form and in content challenging the status quo, it reminds me of, there's an energy, but I feel that of many forms of whatever you might call revolutionary cinema, that the form and the content of them are trying to change the status quo. So yeah, I mean, I find that exciting. How we make it now in our own work, I think that's, an act of constant reinvention in terms of, because we can't go back and make The Living End or Go Fish again. As much as I want to see that happen for both of you. The older but wiser Go Fish and Living End.
Cheryl already made owls, so the ship has sailed. But I was going to answer your question, Ruby. I think for me, and I think it's funny. I've been working on a feature for a long time about, and inside of that is this notion of being, I'm first generation, and there's this notion of over assimilation pulling us away from our own true identities. And I see that not only with myself as a Puerto Rican woman, but I see myself with that as someone who is queer, and queer as mainstream now, and sort of like, being invited into the horrifying thing that's called marriage, that's not worked for anybody, and I see a lot of my friends get married the same way. Look, I'm happy. I'm happy for people. I've officiated four weddings already, and one divorce, but no, I didn't officiate that. But I just think that there has to be this kind of, one has to remind themselves, because I ask myself this question all the time, like, where's my bite? Where's my confidence that I had? I had a blind confidence when I was younger, and now I feel a little bit more scared at the same time, and also wanting to shove myself into my comfortable pocket. Inside the comfortable pocket, great films are not made. And I think we have to push ourselves outside of the comfortable pocket, because it's kind of an illusion. That is what I will say about that.
Okay. All right. Gregg or Isaac, do you have any thoughts on this?
I'm thinking, Ruby, about the end of Looking for Langston, where you have like the mob, and they are knocking on the door, and they basically are knocking on the door with truncheons, and they're going to smash that sort of gathering of people enjoying themselves, of gatherings. And in a sense, what happens is there's an angel that basically, in a way, gives them a signal, and then that mob enters into a space where everybody is kind of vanished or disappeared in terms of time. So there's a kind of trick that's being played both on audiences' expectations, but also of the ultimate sort of question of violence, which is alive and well in our culture, which we've just seen last week. So I think that kind of mob reaction and thinking about the sort of aesthetic strategies in that work I feel very compelled in a sense to return back to some of the questions and aesthetics of Looking for Langston. My new work, which is looking at Alan Locke, who was a person who more or less invented the Harlem Renaissance, who was a queer Black sort of scholar and philosopher, and to look at that as a kind of portrait that would somehow return us back to some of these unfinished conversations, and this recurring theme of, if you like, sort of art and the kind of violence, which I think is something which Locke was negotiating, in its many forms. So I think, to my mind, there are lots of people who are working now, sort of living here in the Bay Area for some time in San Francisco. I've come across amazing young curators who are basically working and pushing the envelope. The new social movements program that's part of the Lessons of the Hour exhibition, where I have a co-curator who's worked on this amazing program of films. I was very struck by this program of films, which are shown at the McAvoy, which anyone can see actually online, of the kind of energy. And it reminded me of the sort of, if you like, energy of the new queer cinema, mostly Black filmmakers, but not entirely, some queer, some not. But it had this kind of energy, this zeitgeist of really pinpointing where we are at the moment.
That's great, Isaac. Thank you. That's McAvoy Fine Arts, right, if people want to find it. And I do think that Looking for Langston and its representation of the white fascists trying to break down the doors and come in and attack people really came to mind during the siege of the Capitol and these terrible attacks. It was very, very prophetic of you, I'm afraid. You weren't just reaching back in history. It's come back around again. Gregg, what are your thoughts today? What are you thinking about?
I was just thinking about your original question and how, I feel like as a queer person and as a person of color, I've always felt it's such a great advantage, not to diss Tom or any of our white male compatriots, but the idea that it's a great place to come from, it's a great voice to have, because you're always looking at things from the outside, and you're always looking at things from the oppressed, the people who, if the fascist shit did go down, would be the first to go, so you're always had that feeling of wariness towards the, certainly fascism, Nazism, and just the sort of dominant culture. And I think as an artist, I think that's such an advantageous place to come from.
That's great. That's great. I don't think any of us have had the luxury of being complacent at any time. And I think that that's lucky for the culture, because it's produced the work that you all do, and it's work that we really need now. Any last thoughts about the way in which social media has created a language that enabled a lot of what's been going on this year and this month, that you think holds any clues for how to move going forward? How do we re-educate audiences? How do we reach people who've been saturated with this kind of material? We have a few minutes left. Any thoughts on that? You were shaking your head, Tom. Any thought?
Well, I just think that the way we watched movies, which was both the individual experience of having the lights darkened and watch a movie, and at the same time have the collective experience of, it's like, think of movies where the light gets very dim and then suddenly the light gets bright and you become aware that you're in a room and other people are sitting next to you. That's almost not replaceable. Obviously, COVID's complicated that, but long before COVID, we had shifted away from this collective/individual experience of the work. I don't want to romanticize that either. I binge watch, TV's fantastic, etc. But yeah, I think there's something It's like also, now why I find that when you make a phone call, it's shockingly intimate in the time of Zoom. I prefer phone calls actually to Zoom because just the voice and the mystery and romance of imagining the person you're speaking to, as opposed to the hideous apparentness of Zoom.
True enough. But many of you have worked in TV. I mean, Rose, you've done so much TV. Gregg, you've done so much TV. You've done a bit, Tom. You've done a bit, Isaac. I don't think we have that gap anymore. And yet, I think generationally, we share that love of the audience, of the physical audience, and that love of a shared space, and at least the fantasy or the delusion of a public that you're making your work for. So hopefully that will come back. Hopefully we'll get to re-enter those spaces, not only within your films, but also to have your films re-enter those spaces in the world, or maybe new spaces that are about to be invented that we don't know yet.
I was just going to say we're in new spaces with VR and with AR and what that is. I think that, and to answer your question, Ruby, I feel like, and it's interesting to work for me to work in those spaces, and to create, these pieces. We keep on upping the ante of like how much we're including the body in the experience of viewing, right? And it used to be that we were these kind of passive viewers inside of something. Now we're interacting with the media itself. I was going to answer your question really briefly and just say, I think in order for us to know how to move forward with social media is for us to really understand how we consume it and how we demystify it and don't let it lead us. I mean, literally you're watching a TV show and people are saying what they feel about it right then and there. There's not this opportunity to fully, like what Tom was saying about, like, you see a movie, the lights come up, there's this transition. There's no, the gap between the viewing and the transition are, minuscule now. That's not even the right way. I didn't pronounce that correctly. But it's just instant. And I think that we have to look at that kind of consumption, and the work that's being, and to know that we are all targets in terms of like your Netflix feed, where all of our data is being, is being recorded so that we can be more and more, kind of catered to, and that makes our world smaller and smaller. So as much as we can, we just have to try to bust out of that. Use someone else's Netflix account.
I love that. We're going to end on that, Rose. That's a great finale. Thank you, everyone, and on to the next.
All right.
Well, it's really wonderful to pick up this conversation with the four of you. We've just been talking with some of the folks around at the kind of foundational moment of the new queer cinema back in 1992, when I organized this panel at Sundance that was named, not by me, was named Barbed Wire Kisses, which I've just learned was taken from a Jesus and Mary Chain song, and was named by Alberto Garcia, who worked for the festival back then. He called me up and said, I had this crazy idea at 4 a.m. We had to go to print. I hope you don't mind. I just gave your panel a title. And that was it. So I thought it was kind of cool for the title. But what I'm interested in now is really hearing from all of you about how aware you were of that moment, what it meant to you, how it influenced you when you were starting out, and then eventually we'll get around to our current day and what we think has lasted and what should be pursued. So can I start with you, Cheryl? I mean, you make
Sure.
Watermelon Woman in 1996, but I had seen a lot of your short video pieces before then. I'd even curated them. And what was this moment like for you in the early 90s when you're making your first feature?
Sure. Thanks for having me on the panel. Thanks for Sundance. All the thanks have to be given. And I remember coming to Sundance way, like when it was still called the USA Festival with my shorts. I had no idea what it was, but very excited to be kind of the first sort of African-American lesbian who was out, who was making work. And I was making this transition from the art world. I was at Rutgers where I got my graduate degree and living in New York when I had been living in Philly, with this power that I had around, a lot of my African American gay male friends had passed away. We're talking, about just this mourning and this kind of gift from them to just go on and make work. Essex Hemphill was a huge, player in that game for me because he was in Philly at the time. And he said, basically, Cheryl, all this frustration you're having about, where you fit in the timeline of making video art or videos, just don't worry about it. Don't worry about the tokenism of it, because what you can do with a token is you put it in the bus and you ride. And I was like, oh, snap, I know exactly what to do. So, basically, he gave me permission. He gave me my mission, and I was there to fill in those holes. And so I just started making tons of work, from my graduate pieces, Janine, She Don't Fade, The Potluck and the Passion. And then I ran into Good Machine, who was already, involved with Christine and, already making work, Ted and James. They had this sort of idea, it was intellectual as well as political type of work that was being made by queer folks, lesbian and gay people at the time. And they put me in their timeline. I ended up getting a grant in Philly. I presented that to Good Machine, and they said that's not enough money to make your short because you have to raise your money. I was like, what? But they helped me kind of move from the video art world into the film world. So with them, I made Greetings from Africa, and that took me to Sundance, and it took me to Berlin, and it took me walking around with this like little poster saying, "Hi, I'm Cheryl. I'm working on The Watermelon Woman. Can you help me, make a film?" And that's not the way you did it. So I went back. I found the power within myself, as well as my partner, Alexander Uhas, who was my partner at that time. And we decided to make the film ourselves. We applied for an NEA with Women Make Movies being our fiscal sponsor. I did it the same way that I always do my work, which is collaborative. I worked on the photographs with Zoe Leonard and a bunch of, kids in the city, and a lot of you guys know them, and some of you were them. Just really about community and empowering that process and bouncing off this moment of me in New York and this community that's art and film and video. And I ended up, making The Watermelon Woman with the team. And it didn't show at Sundance, but it did go on to win the Teddy at Berlin, and just sort of launched everything for me.
Wow, it should have been at Sundance. But Berlin is still your happy place, isn't it?
It is.
That festival is so great. Yeah. Thanks for that. Lisa, I want to ask you, because you were also in New York back at that time. And when you came to Sundance with High Art, that was another signal moment. So what was this time like for you in terms of those early influences and what you saw going on?
I'm from LA, and I did go to New York. I have to say, I think it all started with seeing Jane Campion's Sweetie. I was traveling. I happened to see it in Georgia.
Yes.
I was young. I was deciding to become a filmmaker, and that really kind of sealed the deal for me because I could sort of finally feel myself in the director's chair as a woman saying something that I felt at the time was dangerous and provocative. The myth of unconditional love, parental love, all these themes that I thought, oh, fuck, you can say these things in a movie. And that sort of sat with me. And then I came back to LA. So that was, I don't know when that film came out, probably 87. I came back to LA and I was bouncing around. I ended up in the cutting room at working on Boys in the Hood with John Singleton. And I thought a lot during that time about, new voices, young voices, underrepresented communities, people from the outside that could finally find their way out into the inside. And I could see things changing. And then I had my eye on going to film school. And I was really influenced by people like Nan Golden and Marlon Riggs was making work, and David Wojnarowicz, and there was interesting kind of people that were really outsider art at the time doing things again that I found quite provocative and fresh. And, sort of had my eye on Todd Haynes and Good Machine and Christine and, I thought, well, there's no way I'm going to make this happen here in LA. So I'm going to pack up and go to New York, where I think this is happening. And I ended up at Columbia Film School with all this kind of in my, emotional creative arsenal. And I thought, okay, I want to, learn how to write. I think I have to write my own way to this career. It's not going to happen the LA way. And I think I do have a kind of an outsider point of view that's starting to, fold into what the zeitgeist seems to be right now with independent filmmaking, but it's still fresh enough. It's not a crowded marketplace. There's probably room for me. And I went to Columbia, and it was, as I've said to people coming up, it was really the golden age of independent filmmaking. And I just kind of got it in my head. I said, this is a really expensive roll of the dice to go to film school. So Lisa, you're going to sit down, you're going to write your own story. You're going to just be passionate, do something you want to do, write a feature. And I just had sort of a mantra, and I said, you're going to find somebody who's going to want to make this movie with you and give you money, and then you're going to go to Sundance and somebody will buy it and you'll start a career and blah, blah, blah. And it's kind of what happened. And it just was the sweet spot, because I think that people were really interested in going to the next level of, independent and queer and Black and outsider cinema. We had a generation of, what came before it, John Sayles, and I've heard the Mermaid singing and whatever, Derek Jarman, and there was stuff, but I think people were ready for more voices and to blend things up, to have different yarns, different experiences, not just a trope that was, there were alternative people working, but not just a trope of, forbidden love, not just the familiar, really bringing in new worlds, new points of view. And I was fortunate enough to just, take this kind of stew of experiences and perspectives and write a script. And that really happened. And I think it happened because I just landed at the right place at the right time with high art.
It happened because you didn't know it couldn't.
I just could say, Cheryl was making work. You came a little bit before me. I was like, that was inspiring. Todd was making work. I could just see, oh, these people are making work. There's a young James Seamus who's working with Ang Lee. There's people that are bringing people in, and they're making gay films and gay in sensibility, gay in content. They're the cultural translators beyond just being gay. And I found that just like incredibly exciting. And, even looking back, I'm just so thrilled that that's kind of where I could come out as a filmmaker, that I got to do that with my own voice.
That's great.
So it was completely authentic. I mean, I think people are still making that kind of work, but I think it was just a more, it was like the Wild West a little bit still. It was a very wide open moment. And I want to go to you, Silas, because you almost have two careers. You start out in 2001 with By Hook or By Crook, that you make with Harry Dodge. And then you go back to film school and you come back out with these amazing new short pieces like Golden Age of Hustlers and Sticks and Stones, and now are working continuing. So I wonder, what's your sense of this time? Is it similar? Is it different? What was inspiring you out of that early wave?
Yeah, I mean, so much. I'm kind of obsessed with this time because it was, I guess, my coming of age time. I moved to San Francisco, at like 18, 19 years old. And I was part of the generation that wasn't blindsided by AIDS, but was raised in it. So this was the sort of the landscape of coming out, was meeting all these mentors and then seeing them that were a bit older than myself and seeing them die. And so it was, it added urgency to everything. And I always think about, in a way that, having success nowhere on the horizon meant we couldn't fail because people expected nothing from us. So there was no representation. So it was we had to build systems. We built systems. We built like, here's a cafe, here's a band, we took turns being the important person in the room. And we just kind of we made our own thing because we were so rejected, especially being queer. We didn't fit in gay or lesbian. And we were just like the outsiders of the outsiders. It felt like that anyway. And but it was also a very powerful moment because there were so few of us. We had to deal with each other. We had to learn about each other. And like my band, we were all different backgrounds, different ethnicities. And then we were thrown in a van for 10 years and had to figure out each other and pissing off each other and learning and growing up together. So it feels like, and then New Queer Cinema, all those films were so, I mean, they were really formative. And, you know, I remembered, High Art for sure. And I remembered, I think I was even, Cheryl, with Watermelon Woman, I was like going to try to do a karaoke scene or something. There was something when Guinevere was talking about Watermelon Woman where I was trying to get in on I was trying to get a cameo in on that. And I just got my I just got my audition from Boys Don't Cry. This is being used in this thing on casting for the Motion Picture Academy. And so they have my audition next to Hilary Swank, which is hilarious. But you know, it was really, you know, it relates so much to now, I guess, for myself because of the two pandemics. I mean, a lot of things are very different about the pandemics, but a lot of things are the same. And then there's Fauci, and then there's Nancy Pelosi, and then there's also this mistrust that people have when people were looking at each other sideways, and that fear. I remember that look, being an very out queer person, that it was like, it was a very homophobic, racist, misogynist time. And unfortunately, that's not unlike today. And so I feel like we are back here to learn something else, you know, that maybe, you know, this, us as outsiders have a place, you know, in the center of stories. That's what stories do. If you center a story, everybody can connect, but you have to truly, truly center it. You have to have more than one character like themselves in the room to talk to each other and not be talking to like the, talking points. I guess the main thing Harry Dodge and I were really determined to do was not explain ourselves. We put in these genderqueer characters and we just didn't, and they called themselves he and the cops called them she, and we didn't explain it. We just figured you can do the math, you know, because we've all done that our whole lives, watch movies that are not about our lives, and if they're good stories, we fall in love with them. And so I think that it's a powerful time, and I feel like maybe, you know, for myself, I feel we are back at a place because we have something else to learn. And I think for storytelling, that gives us a lot of opportunities. Because, just so much. I mean, I think about Rodney King and what was happening and the, you know, video camera and just like, we were doing our own streetwear, and that became fashion, and FUBU made their own, you know, line that was like, it was definitely a time of everybody trying to build systems. And so I think that's, I don't know, I think the kids these days, I'm old enough to say the kids these days feel that way as well. That they need to make systems that are, you know, that are their own because they have a very hostile world that they're coming out into. So I feel connected.
That's great
in that way as well.
Yeah. Thanks, Silas. Thanks so much. Andrew, it was just 5 years ago that you came to Sundance with Spa Night, and we did a panel together, actually. And I'd love to hear from you, you know, coming as the new kid on the block, so to speak, what you've taken from these earlier years, what's there for you, maybe some of it doesn't matter anymore, maybe some of it does, but how do you feel right now and how has it impacted your work?
Yeah, it's so interesting for me because I think for a lot of, you know, queer people, when you grow up, you feel like the only one, like you feel like you're the first queer person. And it wasn't until I got older, you know, in college and in grad school, that I had this education about, you know, new queer cinema, the folks and the films, you know, as a part of that movement. And a big part of it was because, you know, one of my grad school professors, Abigail Severance, you know, like has a connection to that community. Like she showed us by hook or by crook, and, you know, like I watched Poison in her class, like this education to know that like there were these films before, and then to realize that there was an infrastructure built that I was benefiting from, even if I wasn't aware of it consciously, you know? And so, you know, when I was in grad school, I was a PA for Silas's movie on Sunset Stories, you know? And,
wow.
And then, you know, at Sundance in 2016, like Silas was at my like Spa Night karaoke party, you know, and so there was this understanding of like there is a history, a connection, that it's constantly growing and building. I will say now, kind of, as a filmmaker in this phase of my career, I think a lot about kind of the future and kind of this kind of mainstreamification of queer culture and how that can and has like abandoned like parts of our community that aren't necessarily like aren't cis white, like privileged, and so I think about infrastructure and like having to like proactively build it. Like I think if we get lazy with it, right, we're like, oh, like queer culture is going to be fine, then it's just going to turn into the most palatable, like least challenging, unhealthy thing for us, right? It's just candy when we really need like fiber, And so I think about the ways in which like we can't be complacent. We can't rest on the work that's been done and just really continue it and make sure that that it's robust for the next generation. And that's really hard. It's really difficult because I think the state of the arts in this country, it's just we don't get the support that we necessarily need in order to focus on the work that we want to. I think for a lot of American independent filmmakers, it's like, oh, like we turn to television because there's funding there, we can make a living. But it's like I'd love to have more time for myself to be able to do something like Spa Night again. It's something that I think could be so meaningful. And so I as much as I feel like there's hope and optimism for the future, like I do have a kind of low grade anxiety that if again like we get complacent, like it's just gonna it's not gonna be the community that we want it to be.
Yeah.
Well, this is just so fascinating because I was hoping this panel would be generative, but I hadn't realized to what extent it would be generational and cross-generational as well. And where do we land now? I mean, here we are in this fraught moment in this country. And, where is the inspiration now? What are the new strategies that are being demanded from all of you? I mean, how do you reach audiences that have been so saturated with the kind of online media that we've been seeing take over with its alternate reality? Not that those people are the ones you're making work for, but there's a way in which a switch has been flipped and people are absorbing media in some different way, maybe not. Is there going to be a new kind of public space after the vaccine? We don't know. I mean, how are you thinking about it now? And where does queerness fit into it? Where does the kind of original new queer cinema aesthetic fit into it? What are the challenges for you now? What do you see ahead? I'm curious to hear.
I just have one thought off of what Andrew was saying about community, is that that's kind of how I survived making film. I didn't get the memo that to be independent filmmaker, you needed to be independently wealthy. So I was like, how do you do this? How do you survive this? And it was really my community and taking and doing everything backwards, making a feature with no experience, going to film school to learn my craft, making another feature, then making a short, making whatever I could get my hands on. But it was the community that greenlit me. And I realized at a certain point when I was, getting onto the age where I felt like I should have some security financially, and I didn't. But I had success because I was making work. And so I think that community is still around, and whatever platform that takes shape. I mean, I watched in the pandemic, Twitch, drag shows, all kinds of, Zoom live events. There was even a sex party on Zoom. That seems really interesting. Maybe still in beta, but that you saw the art just find a way, like we find a way, because that's what we do. We have to. But it is the isolation is at a high cost, and all of that is true. And personally, I was able to, I lost a bunch of work, but I also was able to work on my own work, which was exciting and get that out there. But I do think for me, it's always community more than anything, and finding the right people, that get you, that see you and get you. It's basic like that for me.
Cool. Anyone else?
Agreed. I agree with you 200%. And I also think that, the generational aspect of all of this that keeps kind of racing forward is technology, right? So we're able to do before, what that last panel was not able to do because of video, instead of 16. And I tried to put both of them together in some crazy way with the Watermelon Woman, which was unheard of. But now you could do that in your home on your phone. So I think as technology and the outlets of these, technological, things are synergizing and merging, and people are having access to them, queer, not queer, Android, your merged identities, we'll start seeing this work that's, out of this world. So I think the kind of, advance this technology getting in the hands of individuals, and again with the spirit of defining their own community, putting themselves in the picture. I think that is, be it in a box alone to to a virtual identity. I think that's the next gen that's coming out. I have a 20-year-old and a 22-year-old, and they have so many identities. They're theys, they're whatever they want to be, because I think a lot of it plays with who they are online. And so we're starting to see those new forms and new beings kind of, coming out of it. I think the biggest job for me, beyond, making work as I have and continue to do, is to step out of the way. And I think that's one thing that is a little bit problematic with the whole system, is that people are not stepping out of the way, right? They want to be young and there forever. So we just need, and I am so ready to step out of the way because there's other things I want to do in this timeline of legacy, of life. So I have a few things to do, but then I'm going to step out of the way and let it be done. And that's, I think that's the strength of us being queer, of being leaders, of being on this panel, is how do we kind of move on and, not try to get your fingers in everything else, but helping other people with their systems, get set up. So that's what I think.
I just want to add one thing of the systems that, need to expand the pool, right? There needs to be more than the 4 of us that are gone to get hired to represent different things, right? So how do we widen the pool? It means the people have to take risks, like they took risks on me, took a risk, anyway, just that's what I feel like I'm pushing against in this, especially in COVID, to say, no, you have to widen the pool. You have to, if you want equity, you have to build it. You can't just imagine people have access.
Thanks for that. Lisa, you were going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I love what everybody's saying, Cheryl and Silas, and I think one thing that new queer cinema did was really open the space of what's queer and what's weird, and I think it's not so narrow anymore. I think people are freaky, and a great story well told is queer. It's weird. It's outsider. And I think that we're, along with technology being so many things now, at the time I was like, I just want my 35 millimeter film, there's so much more diversity of identity and voice. And I think it's way beyond what we could have imagined at that time. And I'm grateful that I got to be part of that time, which I think, in these iterations is something else. But I do think, I have a 14-year-old kid, he's about to turn 15. And to him, queerness is, so what, blackness is don't be, they're just in a whole other headspace about all the identity politics that I think we had to deal with in a much more serious way. I think they're always going to be there. I think there's really important stories to be told. But I do think that there's more of an appetite and more of a platform and more space. That maybe I'm being naive. That's my take when I stream around TV and I see what's being represented. There's just more. So that's exciting. There's always more to be done. Yeah. There's always things that are incredibly disappointing. That's where we are. We're gonna forget about the horrible moment. But I do think queerness is it's just more of an expansive category, and I'm grateful for that.
That's great.
Yeah,
that's great. Andrew, last thoughts?
Yeah, I have to really agree that because of access, people can make image, can make film, video in various ways so much more easily now. And I think it's a very intimate, personal process. I think for me, the biggest thing is to think about like how that can grow and how people can get connected, in meaningful ways that create additional opportunity. I think that especially because of the pandemic, like we all kind of had to focus on ourselves and had to find kind of ways of expressing ourselves. And I think post-pandemic, it'll be a question of how can we reconnect, how can we collaborate, how can we build. And I think about distribution, like big and small, as something that I think is a real important next step. I think about with Spawnite, like Spawnite was distributed by Strand Releasing, and Marcus Hu was a connector, for me. And I ended up working with James and Christine on projects, and he told me that he made my career and that he could break me. And so it's this thing where Marcus was really helpful for me in getting my work out there and showing it to people that would help me grow my career. And so that's what I really want for all the super talented young filmmakers out there, is that they can get that opportunity to grow and make something even more beautiful, even more personal, even more bold.
Well, that is a great spot to end on. I mean, I love the positivity of this gang here, and I love the optimism in dark times. I think it's really important to carry that forward. And it really reminds me of something I once wrote years ago, fighting back against the idea of kind of the oppression of being queer. And I said, no, wait. What we're lucky, what we have is this queer passport, that wherever we were stuck, we got out because we were queer. It gave us a passport out of that small town, out of that dead-end neighborhood, out of that dead-end job, out of the, high school boyfriend or girlfriend. We didn't have to do any of that. And we escaped and got to kind of make these lives and to make these films. So I love ending on this kind of really high note. And I really thank you all for that. We are just about out of time, but I want to thank, since you mentioned Marcus, I want to thank Marcus Hu for pioneering this idea of this panel, and John Nine for supporting it, and the folks at Sundance. I want to thank Kim Yutani and Tabitha Jackson for having us, be included this way and giving us this platform to kind of think through these ideas and these issues in the context of 2021 virtual Sundance. So thank you all. Thanks, everybody. And total pleasure. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys.
Bye. Thank you.